you have in your home, how they got there, ages and all that kind of stuff. And then kind of how did anger especially present at the beginning of this process for you?
Yeah. Um, so I'll start off saying a lot of the seasoned foster parents are going to listen to things I'm saying, and it's going to sound really familiar. And it's probably things we've had meetings about. And you were like, you don't know what we're experiencing. Well, now I do. And so I currently have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. When we got them, they were 4 and 9. We got them last August, and I've taught, my kids are really involved with my work. They like to, know how I'm helping kids. And I have um, definitely asked permission because I think it's important that I have their permission to talk about their story. My littlest one is super thrilled. She even did her own interview with me that maybe I'll share some time with some of y'all, where she really wants to talk about how she's recovered and healed in a lot of areas. So she's all on board, and everything I'm going to talk about, she has given me full permission to talk about. So a little background about my girls is they are biological sisters. They're 2 of 5. There are 3 older ones that don't live with us and are not able to live with us at this point. They have been in care since they were 18 months and 5 years old. And so the youngest one had been with the same family pretty much her entire life. And they were not in a place where they wanted to adopt. And so they looked for a foster home that was open to adoption. And we had we were fortunate that I actually knew the little one for about 2 years up until this point. And so my husband and I were going through the process to get licensed to adopt a sibling group. And we kind of came across that these girls needed a home, and the rest is kind of history. We got chosen. So I knew a little bit what we were getting into. She was the kid that screamed in church for hours every Sunday. And I had been working with her for 2 years in Sunday school, so I kind of knew, she gets aggressive. She didn't trust people. She recoiled a lot. She didn't like a lot of interaction. She tended to stay by herself. So I kind of knew all this going into it. So when we got her, it was exciting at first, and she'll tell you she was really happy to be with me because, she liked me as her Sunday school teacher. Well, that very quickly changed. And she, the anger showed up pretty quickly. I mean, I would say maybe the first 2 weeks. She loved to express herself verbally about how she was feeling about our family. And for her, because she didn't remember her biological family, it was like a first removal for her. I would say a lot of her feelings and actions are what I would usually see and expect in a kid who is just being moved. And there were some things in her other family, in her former foster family, that had kind of sowed some of that anger into her. Her and the foster mom didn't get along. And so a lot of the anger we saw was, this was who she saw as her family. And she was like, well, y'all are my foster family. They were my real family. So we had to kind of reintroduce that. Like, no, they weren't either. But a lot of the common things that we saw was spitting, kicking, biting, screaming. A lot of I hate yous, you're not my mom. I love to tell my favorite stories, and she thinks they're interesting. We got kicked out of the Bath Hall. We were at a ballet there, and she decided to, what I can only say was like a feral animal, and it's very impressive, but she would get on all fours and was screaming and spitting, and just completely, I couldn't control her at all. Like, she was running around the Bath Hall. They eventually asked us to leave, and she took off running down Fort Worth, whatever avenue that is. And I had to restrain her in the street. And so we were sitting, and all my stuff was inside with my other daughter and my sister. And so I was by myself in the middle of downtown Fort Worth with the kid screaming, I hate you, and spitting and trying to bite me. And I'm trying to restrain her. to keep her safe. And that was probably one of the lowest moments. And that was they'd only been in our home 2 months at that point. And I just broke down and bawled. And this was a daily thing. Um, she didn't feel safe. I think the first week we were there, she told me she didn't trust anybody. She could only trust herself. I mean, she's 4 years old verbalizing this. And so, I mean, like, we approached it, I'm like, hey, I've had all this training. I've worked in this area. Like, I can handle this very quickly. I learned how emotional and exhausting this is, especially when it is constant. Um, and I definitely very early on felt that fatigue of just like, this is a constant thing. We missed out on a ton of events, a ton of family dinners, a ton of birthday parties, because we couldn't go, because right before we were to leave, she'd have meltdowns. And on average, she would have these little meltdowns for like 3 to 5. The most I think we had was a 7 hour meltdown that took the entire day. She had a CKBH person come out, and they left because she wouldn't stop screaming and kicking. They left me there, and we just laid next to her on the floor for about 5 to 6 hours. We took turns, because we obviously have another child in our home that we had to deal with, and we missed a family birthday party, I think. And so in the beginning, we felt that isolation. We couldn't go anywhere. I definitely couldn't take her anywhere, because if I took her anywhere alone, we would have a huge meltdown. Target, many times I just sat on the floor in Target while she screamed, until she calmed down. And I think one day she was standing on a table screaming, and I just said, just calm down. And she goes, I don't know how. And that was that light bulb in me. It's like, she's never been taught. And I kind of kick myself now for it. Now I should have realized that early on. She'd never been taught how to regulate. She just knew screaming and getting sent to her room. So at that point, we started implementing the calm down box that I had already prepared and just hadn't brought out yet, and started to try things out. And we found that she loved aromatherapy putty. So we had peppermint, and it's almost like a silly putty type consistency, and then a lavender one that was almost like a Play-Doh. And those became our go-tos. That just really, she would just sit there, and I'd sit next to her because she wanted touch. She wanted to be held, but she didn't know how to ask for it. And her way of asking for it was to kick. And so obviously my first reaction is to step back. And we had to learn really quickly that she wanted that physical touch. And so I would always ask, do you want me to help you calm down? And she would say yes. I was like, do you want me to hold you? And she would say yes. And so I would hold her, give her her putty, and we would sit there, and she would still scream and cry. But soon, the more we did it, the quicker she would calm down. And probably I would say by Christmas, we had seen a huge reduction in these fits, to where if she did have one, it was maybe 30 minutes, and they definitely weren't daily anymore. But the upfront work that we did took a ton of time, a ton of effort, a lot of tears on everybody's end. And we had to set the bar low at the beginning. We couldn't expect her. I was more concerned about safety. And so the first few months was, okay, how can we make sure she's safe and everybody else is safe? We had to send my dog on a respite trip to my mom's house for a couple of months because she was aggressive towards him. And if anybody knows me, we love our pets. We love my dogs. We have 3 now. But for me, it was more important that she learn how to be okay. And then we reintroduced him once she was able to control her hitting. But we set the bar real low in the beginning. All I needed was her to be safe and us to be safe. And then once we got a handle on that, we worked on, okay, how can we communicate what you're needing without screaming? And then now we're at a point in our, we've been together a year now, we can redirect her. We can say, okay, you're starting to get upset. Let's, think through this. And we, okay, that's not respectful. That's really rude. So it took time, but we eventually were able to work together to where, they're, handling situations, and they can, act in a way that we really would like them to act in public or with us, which, you know, I couldn't have asked that of her back when she was first, because she had a lot of anger. So that was definitely what we dealt with in the beginning.
So, and you mentioned that, you know, she didn't feel safe,
Mm.
all those kinds of things like when you come in. So, but so after she felt safe and things got better, were there times that you could see that was there, and maybe for her sister, was there a correlation with feeling safe with letting some feelings that came out that didn't at all?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I noticed there was a difference by how she acted in the beginning. She didn't trust anybody.
Mm.
She didn't feel safe. She thought we were going to kick her out. Both of them did. Both of them have very insecure with our relationship. Um, but once she started getting close to us and she started, um, and I can tell you all the time, she really didn't like my husband. She hated him. She would turn our wedding pictures around. um, Told me I needed a new husband. She called him fat guy for a long time. Um, and she, but once she started letting him in, we also noticed that anger outbursts kind of came back, but in a different way. It wasn't her fighting us because she didn't want to be there anymore. She didn't understand what was going on. It was her, I'm scared that this isn't going to last. Um, she's very verbal. She's a very thoughtful kid. She knows, she thinks about everything, and she can tell you exactly what she's thinking. She's afraid that we're going to push her away. So her new thing became, well, I'm going to push you away first before you hurt me. And so that's where a lot of the angry, like just using words like, well, when am I getting my new family? Um, and we had to remain calm. This is where, like, emotionally, like, I knew that kids are going to say this, and I had to disconnect my feelings. Um, because if I let what she said get to me, I mean, I can't tell you how many days she tells me, when am I getting a new mom? You're a bad mom. I want a new mom. Um, and I just had to say, like, I understand that. Like, you feel angry. I think we really focused on, okay, here are these lies that you're believing, is that if you love us, it's going to go bad and you're going to leave. And so we started introducing the idea of the lies she's believing. Um, and she has a horrible jealousy issue, of, if you love her, you can't love me. If you love him, you can't love me. And we had, it's a daily, I mean, even now it's a daily reassurance that we can, our love is big. God created love to be big, and not just for one person. But there are some days, if she's feeling vulnerable, that's a real struggle for her, and we can see an uptick in her just using angry words, because that's her go-to. She's really clever with insults, and so she has a great brain, but she we want her to use it for good. But she that's her go-to, is just like, I'm gonna hurt you because that way you can't hurt me.
So the anger had a different quality to it. It didn't,
Mm-hmm.
it's not during this phase, it wasn't the totally out of control.
Oh, it was
It was
very
more controlled.
calculative.
Did it
Mm-hmm.
feel more personal?
Yes. Oh yeah. Definitely more personal. So it did shift. The meltdowns weren't near as bad, but what she was saying was more aggressive. And she would say things to her sister like, I'm going to get you kicked out of this family, which is very hurtful. And we still, I mean, struggle with that now. They, have normal sibling rivalry, but that's kind of her go-to, is like, I'm just going to get you where it hurts. And so, and it's a lot of work of like, okay, well, what you're really trying to say is that I'm scared, or I'm angry, or I'm frustrated, and I don't like this situation. So like, let's use those words, because those are more, what you're feeling, versus us just using words to make us react. And that's the thing, is she wanted a reaction, because that's what she would get from her former parents, or foster parents, is she would get reactions. And when she gets a reaction, she has this look on her face like, I got you. And she'll kind of sit back. And so whenever I have, and I can tell y'all how many of the times I've messed up and done everything I tell y'all not to do, and everything Dr. Heath just told us not to do, I've done them all. And the moment I would give in to my feelings and get frustrated, she'd look back, and it's like, there, I won. And I had to realize that's her trying to gain power. She wants to feel in control because she doesn't like not feeling in control. And so we had to kind of be that neutral thing. And she'll tell you whenever she'd say, "You're not my mom," I would just say, "You're right, I'm not. Like, you didn't come from my tummy, but I am the mom here taking care of you. So I'm like, I understand I'm not your biological mom." And, she will tell me that all the time. Like, you tell me that. And that helped her feel okay to feel what she's feeling, to feel angry at the situation because she didn't ask to be in my home. So I think those are all important things that we had to remember, even as like I felt like, hey, we're doing pretty good. Like, she's getting better in these areas, but then we'd have these moments where it just felt like we were going backwards. But it really is, she's trying to figure out her place in our family and her place, um, you know, in families in general, not just our family, like where she sit.
So, and you kind of mentioned that, and this is the other thing that sometimes is difficult is you kind of feel like things are going good and you think, okay, we've made that breakthrough, we're over that hump. And then you hit periods of regression where literally it feels like you're losing ground or things are going backwards. Have you seen things you could identify as that? And are there ever times, how do you separate out what's happening now from a feeling like, I think this is the old trauma coming in?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've noticed anytime for her, there's a big change in routine. So we were doing great in January, February. Like, she was on a roll. I mean, we had no meltdowns. She was thinking through her behaviors and able to communicate when she was feeling things. And then COVID happened and we were stuck at home. And she's a kid who fortunately thrives at school. That's the one area we never had issues with. She was the perfect model student at school. Um, the first 2 months of being at home were rough. I mean, all of us were crying every day because she regressed completely back to the screaming for hours. Um, and it like, I was working full time. So I was in my room trying to be on conference calls and she'd be banging on the door screaming because I wasn't in the room with her. And food is another trigger for her. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. She didn't have consistent feeding as a baby. And so we noticed that's anytime she's a tinge of hunger, like she could have just eaten 30 minutes ago, but she starts feeling any form of like hunger, that's a big trigger for her. So I'd be in the office working and we have snacks available everywhere. Like, we definitely follow the TBR, like feed her every 30 minutes, but sometimes it got hard. She got tired, she got bored, her routine was gone. She went back to the screaming, back to the kicking, hitting. We didn't have spinning so much, but that was a big one. That took 2 months to get her back on track from that. And we had to go back to where had been expecting where she was in January, February. We had to go back down. Like, okay, the bar's dropped again. We got to get her back to here she goes. Because I can tell, like, you can tell when she's relating back to her trauma versus when she's just in a bad mood. And it is a very clear difference for her. But even sometimes I have to remind myself, even if she's had really great weeks, I still have to remind myself if there's been any disruption to something and she's acting a little bit, um, I guess, irritable and things like that, I have to remember, okay, like, what need do we need to meet first? Um, so it took 2 months in COVID, and then we had a great summer. She went back to being great. And then right before school started, because they went back in person in August, we noticed again, she started being really clingy, being really emotional, crying a lot. Um, the first 2 weeks of school, we went back to the screaming for hours after school. And she developed then she would start hitting herself, which she's done on and off. But really, when school went back, after school, would come home just completely inconsolable. You can't talk to her. She would start hitting herself. And so we had to kind of because the putty wasn't working anymore. So we had to find something else that's going to work, because things change over time. The putty had kind of run its course. So we found now that swinging on our swing in the backyard works. And so she's every day she'd get home, I'd give her a snack, we'd go out there and swing. And we did that for a couple weeks. And then she kind of got back into her routine. So definitely routine's a big trigger for her. We went on a vacation in August. So we officially adopted in June. August came, we went on a vacation, and both kids regressed. They both went back to hoarding food. Rosine went to back to the I'm not going to do anything you say. I'm going to do everything I want to do. And it took us about 5 days into our vacation to realize that the last time they went on vacation, they came back and moved homes. And I finally brought that up, and my oldest one was like, I'm scared that we're going to go back and you're going to tell us some bad news. So they didn't see vacation as a fun thing. They saw it as a way of people breaking bad news to them. And so we had to kind of like, oh, we should have realized that this was going to be a trigger. So, I mean, definitely like things that may be related to something that happened in their past are triggers. But the thing, it's easier now to come back from them because we've had a good routine and she's had enough time working in that area where she knows how to regulate herself, that when we do have little relapses, it's easier to get her back. But it definitely takes me to remind myself, oh yeah, like this is going to be an ongoing thing for a while, if not her whole life. That it's work. I mean, it's a lot of work. And knowing that it's going to interrupt my schedule and my routine, and I have to put that aside a lot to get her back to where I know that she can live at.
The vacation story was such a good illustration of that triangle. If you had just consequented the behavior and never figured out what the thinking was that was triggering it, you would have missed it. It wouldn't have gotten better. You couldn't have gotten it better. And what fixed it was figuring out, oh, there's some thinking that's triggering the behavior. So that's great. Are there, the things we talked about doing, are there some particular strategies that you found yourself going back to that you say, these are the ones I keep on the top of my toolbox?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. The talking one is a big for us. My husband and I are big talkers. We talk about everything, and we have a rule in our family: you don't deal with anything alone. My oldest one is a retreater. She wants to deal with everything by herself, and we've kind of made it a rule in our family, like we don't do anything with alone. Like I'm not ever going to just send you to your room. We de-escalate. So whenever there's a behavior, we don't go into punishment or consequence mode or lecture mode, even though I can talk for a long time. It is, okay, she's having a meltdown. I need to make her feel safe. I need to figure out what she's trying to get met. So a lot of hers is emotional. If she feels like she's not getting enough attention. So I know her pretty well. I can be like, hey, do you just need to spend some time with mommy? That'll help a lot for her. But we try to figure out, okay, what is it that she's trying to get? How can we meet it? Does she just need to scream? I mean, there's some days that we all need to scream, and I've had her like, we're going to have a 30-second scream. Let's go. And it could just be she needs to get that out if she's bored. So that's another one. If she's bored, she gets destructive. So we try to figure out the need, and then we try to talk her through it. Once she started to calm down, or she has calmed down, we're like, okay, like let's talk about what happened. And she can usually tell us. And we don't give consequences a ton. We do when it's a safety issue, or if it's something that we know that is like a problem. For her, it's the hitting. If she hits, she's going to get a consequence, because that's something that we keep. We have a rule in our house: we keep everyone safe, and so that's one that's breaking one of our core rules. Like we can't just let that go, but we don't give the consequences while she's freaking out, because it's going to make it worse. We focus on de-escalation, talking her through her feelings after they've happened. And then for her, it's addressing those lies that she's believing, believing that we don't love her. if we give her a consequence, she'll say, it's, you don't love me anymore. Well, we just said, no, we do love you. That's why we give it. Our job as parents is to keep you safe and to help you grow into be an adult. You know, and usually one of those things when she's getting a consequence, it's because she's broken one of those. We do a lot of activities when she is fine. When she's not having meltdowns, we do a lot of prepping. We also do a lot of mindfulness techniques. I'm a big proponent of those. I love, you know, deep breathing exercise. We do mindfulness, like guided imagery, where we lay down and we have one that we call magic bubbles, where we lay down and we blow our worries and thoughts into our magic bubbles and watch them go away. We also do like progressive relaxation, which is where you tighten different muscles and take deep breaths. And we notice for her, those are really helpful, especially if I can tell she's getting kind of, before she has the meltdown. I think a lot of what we do too is try to predict when a meltdown is going to happen. I can tell you, you know, I mean, she's gotten it. I know, we know her well enough, like when she's going to have a meltdown. I can kind of start doing these things before. Now she has lost all of her toys. I hate saying this, but it does. We've had to take away all her toys one time, and this is because of a safety issue with her sister. And we needed to draw a line for her, like this was not okay. But she could earn them all back every day. If she could go without hitting, she could earn a toy back, and she earned it back. It took her about 2 months because she has a lot of toys. But for her, that was the biggest game changer, behavior-wise, because she feels accomplished. Right now, we're on a star system. This happened back with the regression from the back of school. You know, I said, look, like if you have a day where I can see that you're trying, not that you had a perfect day, because we do not expect perfection in our family. It's impossible, and it's setting her up for failure. If you can show that you are trying to control your behaviors or trying to control your feelings, and you can use your words to help tell me what's going on, you can earn a star for your ceiling. And we've had a couple of days where she didn't earn them. But for the most part, and she, like, it is so motivating for her. Every night she gets a star. She counts them every night and says, I've had this many good days. And she's definitely one of those kids, like she needs a visual to see her progress. And so we've had to figure out, you know, like what works. And sometimes things stop working and we got to find something new. And it's a constant, you know, as she's aging and developmentally, you know, having to figure out what's going to work this time.
So finally, can you just kind of, in whatever words you can say, what has the emotional journey been like for you and your husband?
Oh my goodness. It's been a lot. When you said earlier, it's like a battlefield. It really feels that, but it's not a battlefield against the kid. It's a battlefield against this trauma. We went into adoption because we felt like that was what God was calling us to do, which I'm sure most of y'all, I think that's kind of where y'all are at. And it's a daily reminder. It's not about me. It is not about me. My convenience, my hopes and dreams for the day, like I'm an adult, I have to figure out that on my own. It's not on them. But it is exhausting and it is very isolating. We have a great church that is really involved in foster care and adoption. But at the end of the day, people who aren't in it don't know. Many nights I cried, my husband cried, feeling like, are we doing the right thing? We screwed up in all these areas. Like I yelled at her today. I told her just obey, which I don't use the word obey very often. It's a very negative term for them. So they have a really bad reaction to that word. So we just say following directions or listening. But I did one day, you're just not obeying, you know, and then she gets that look like, that's what so-and-so used to tell me. I wish if I could have go back, I would have been more honest with my community of how things were. Because when I say, oh, she's having a meltdown for 7 hours, they think tantrum. They don't think a kid screaming but can't tell you who we are or what her name is or where she's at.
Right.
Both my kids disassociate when they get into that range of upset. And then also just the feelings watching my kids struggle with the hurt and the pain that they've gone through. I always cry at this and I can't stop myself. Like if I could go back and have them stay with their family and never have to go through anything that they went through, I would, because watching my kids struggle is hard. As a parent, you want to take that away. You wish that they don't ever have to deal with any of this. And so I think that that's what keeps us going sometimes, is to see the healing that's happened and knowing that God really is using us as a tool for that. I don't see, because I screw up every day, and I apologize to them every day for losing my cool and doing everything I know not to do, but that God still uses it. God still uses our relationship and the grace that we do give each other. He uses that to heal them and to see where they were. I like to read back through my progress notes from last year and see just what, now I can see how like rough it was, to now like there's thriving. And it really, I do believe it was the work that we put into it. I mean, long days, long nights, lots of tears, lots of disagreements behind closed doors about how we're handling something. But to see how God used that and how God can use foster parents as a tool, like it definitely reminds me how much like I am passionate about this work and how much foster parents really are doing more than just giving them a safe home. Like y'all really are I mean, I always say like y'all are like the therapist, because it's not just the once a week thing that the real therapists do. It's the daily in and out interactions that you give these kids and reteaching them what a family can look like and what having a place to let out those feelings that they've never been able to let out. And it may not always look like we want it to look like, but if you can sit there and hang on through them with it and find ways to meet them where they're at, it really can make such a huge difference. And so many of y'all I've watched go through things like this, and I've seen how hard y'all work, and I've seen y'all at your wit's end, and I'm totally with you sometimes there, but it really is like y'all really are doing the really down on the ground work, and these kids would not ever be where they could be without you helping them through this and walking them through this journey of fighting through trauma. So I just want to say I really appreciate it. It's definitely given me a new respect and appreciation for our foster parents, because yeah, it really is hard and no one else knows except y'all each other. So
Great. Thank you, Staci. Thank you very much. Okay. So, and Reagan, if you're listening, I'm not going to use that video at the end, so just forget about it. So a couple of things. Hopefully there's a lot there and a lot you've learned from Staci, but one of them is